In the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amon Sûl, they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west, in the days of the last alliance. I'm guest co-host Steve Christoforou, and you're listening to the Amon Sûl podcast.
My Govanen and Christo Aurorie, Naitie Aurories. Christ is risen, truly he is risen. Welcome to Amon Sûl, a podcast for tall hobbits with elvish aspirations. I'm Father Anthony, an Orthodox Christian priest, and here we talk about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien because we love them and believe in their power to orient us toward what is highest and noblest. Today, my guest co-host is Steve Christoforou, who was Father Andrew's very first guest co-host, and he's appeared at least twice more over the years. I think that's what you've done. In episode 36, The Arts of the Enemy, you were discussing Saruman and how he exemplifies what not to do. And again, you came back in episode 90, Don't Damage the Burglar, discussing chapter 17 of The Hobbit, in which the Battle of Five Armies begins. And of course, in that first episode, you talked with Father Andrew about how Tolkien helps us to navigate our life in this strange and secular world. So Steve, welcome back to the Amon Sûl podcast.
It's very good to be back. I've lost count now how many times because life is a blur of all these things. So, but that sounds about right. And it's good to be back. It was nice to actually pick up the Lord of the Rings for the first time in a little while and flip through a chapter. As I think I might have shared in one of the earlier episodes, I used to have a rhythm of reading Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings specifically, once a year, every year for a good stretch there, and I've kind of fallen out of it, unfortunately. But it's good. It's good to have the opportunity to read again.
Excellent. And you've had a lot. Well, we'll come to this a little bit, but you've had a lot of changes in your life since that beginning. Would you say Tolkien has been any sort of guide or inspiration as you have adjusted your course and trajectory?
The universe, the world that he creates for us remains a sense of wonder. Mm-hmm. I actually, a fun little thing, I went to New Zealand with my fiance a couple of months ago, which is super cool. And the first thing that we visited was, of course, Hobbiton. And it was very cool to see these things, at least made manifest through the lens of the cinematic version of all of these things. So,
sure.
Yeah, the world of Tolkien continues to sort of create a sense of wonder and curiosity and joy. And it's fun.
And, we'll get to this, but I'll wait for that joke till later. Anyway, on our episode today, Steve and I are going to continue our read-through of The Lord of the Rings. We're going to start, actually, with Book 2, which is the second half of the Fellowship of the Ring, in the chapter Many Meetings. I think this is actually far and away the most that we ever see of Rivendell and the last homely house and Elrond's home. Before we get to that, though, we're going to take a moment to get to know Steve a little bit more than we've had the chance before. So, as kind of indicated, since last time you appeared, Steve, you've made a big move away from your work with the Greek Archdiocese and in the Youth and Young Adult Office, and now you've taken on another position, which I'll let you explain. But I know I encountered you at a place that reminds me at least a little bit of Rivendell as you were on that process of discernment. So anyway, I'd love to hear how the new gig is going. And if you're willing, share with this small-ish but mighty audience we have here how they might connect with the work that you're doing now. And if you want to tie that into Tolkien's writing, well, that would be amazing too.
Yes, yeah, totally. So I spent almost a decade at the Greek Archdiocese leading Youth and Young Adult Ministries and did a lot of different things there, possibly most known for a bunch of content creation that we did, a lot of videos and podcasts, and also curricula and training and retreats and things along those lines. And I left that in August of 22 and sort of retired from content creation more generally because my thoughts about that had sort of changed over the years as well. And in October of that year, I spent a month at St. Gregory of Palamas Monastery, which was a really beautiful place of respite and healing, and trying to just sort of like get a sense of where God was nudging me next, because I really genuinely had no idea. And I think in retrospect now, it's because it's been a couple of years. I think he was nudging me in the direction of Focus, which is a pan-Orthodox ministry that brings Orthodox Christians together to serve. Focus makes Christ's love visible by uniting Orthodox Christians to serve the poor. We do this through a variety of ministries across the country, 13 right now. We're hopefully going to have 17 focus centers up and running by the end of the year, a variety of homeless shelters, feeding programs, support for expectant mothers and families. Just making the invisible kingdom manifest, right? Making the Lord's love visible across the country by mobilizing the church to practice what we preach. And I think there's a connection to the work of Tolkien, because I think if nothing else, the work of Tolkien kind of inspires and it creates the sense of wonder, because I think a lot of what he does is, he's able to convey both the high and the low, the sublime and the mundane, right? He's able to convey these regal and terrible, in the old sense of the word, elves, and these silly little hobbits, right? But all of it, I think, in its own way, reveals the kingdom. From his allusions to these undying lands in the West, to his descriptions of the joy of life in the Shire, and hospitality, I think, in relationship is so often key to how I think this kingdom is manifest in his work, because I think that's really how the kingdom of heaven is manifest, right? The Lord tells us that it's like a marriage feast, right? Hospitality and joy and relationship, it's all there. And honestly, that's what Focus is there to try to do. When we serve meals, we aren't simply giving people physical stuff to put into their physical bellies. This bringing people together around the Lord's table is meant to be sacramental. It's meant to be this lived image of what the promise of the kingdom of heaven is going to be, just in a non-literary sense, right? Tolkien presents this to us on the pages of his writings, but we try, I think, through the lived experience of living as Christians, to make the kingdom of heaven manifest through this hospitality and through this relationality around the Lord's table.
Sure. And, I was thinking as you were talking, first of all, Focus North America is the role that you're in, right? If people look for this on the internet, they should look not just for Focus, because there's any number of things that might come up there, but Focus
Correct.
North America.
FocusNA.org.
Very good. But as you're talking, I was thinking, when we're reading Lord of the Rings, when we're reading most of what Tolkien does, we're with the travelers who are going from place to place, and they're receiving hospitality, and they're doing a particular job, a particular role. We don't ever really, except for rare occasions, settle down and see how these given communities are actually functioning, whether that's the Shire itself or Tom Bombadil's home, or even Rivendell. And what Focus is doing, I would suggest, is the really rubber meets the road work of helping communities of Christians really sink down, put those roots in their communities, and be the church as they're supposed to be. Where most of us, we read Lord of the Rings, we read stuff like this, we're tempted to be the hero, the traveler, the one who's going on a journey. We don't often like to put down those deep roots. We try to keep that, our faith too often remains only in the mind and our imagination and our self-image, as opposed to doing the necessary hard work of life in a community with other people, both with the people that we share the Eucharist with, and that fundamental responsibility of carrying Christ's presence out into the world and connecting with and serving everyone else. So I think it's beautiful that you went to a monastery, you found that you had that rest, you found that direction, and then you went out. So you get to be a little bit of a wanderer, helping to enable everyone else. In fact, you're kind of now you're being Gandalf.
That's a very cool way of looking at my job. I love that. Putting that on my business card now.
Excellent.
I mean, Honestly, what we're doing is, and the story of Focus has grown over the years. When I started, we had 5 Focus centers up and running. And now we're at 13, like I said, and we'll be at 17, God willing, by the end of the year. So, yeah, it's really, what I do as executive director is put teams together, right? Put people together to try to do this work. I'm doing very little directly myself, but just trying to move the pieces of the chessboard, I guess, as Gandalf was doing, right? To put Frodo in a position to do the work.
Sending some, little hobbit children off on adventures into the wide blue yonder every now and again.
Yeah.
So that they can come back and be prepared to actually, all right. I like this. Anyway, that's amazing. Congratulations on the beautiful work you're doing. I've had the opportunity, I should say, or maybe I shouldn't, I don't know, because I'm very close to one of your predecessors. My Kubado, Seraphim Dankert, was executive director for a number of years as well. So I've had conversations.
Twice removed.
Yeah. I've had conversations with him about, Focus North America and what the vision, what the opportunity, what the capabilities are. And it's nice. It's fun to get this glimpse into where it is now, talking with you. And, apodos sea notara. As
by your prayers, Father, yeah.
From here to higher things, for those that don't speak the Greek. That's one of my few phrases, anyway.
But isn't that even a sort of Tolkien-esque thing, right? I look back at this ministry now, which is 17 years old, right? Not old in the grand scheme of things, but relatively old in kind of modern sense. And all of these predecessors who, played their part in this unfolding story.
Sure.
It's this ministry would not be here without Kenny Kidd, who was my immediate predecessor, and Seraphim Dankert, who was my twice removed predecessor, and Nick Shakos, who was my 3 times removed predecessor, and Father Justin Matthews, my 4 times removed predecessor. It's all this unbroken story of people laboring in the kingdom. And right now we're cultivating seeds that were planted years and years ago.
Right. And it's funny to me because again, I've had glimpses at each point. I met with Nick Chakos, when he was trying to, get the Detroit Focus Center started. And remembering what the challenges were that he was dealing with at that time, remembering just the experience of being a parish priest and the very inward defensive focus of the parishes, 15 years ago, not even 13 years ago, and thinking how drastically the world that we live in has changed. And therefore, how much both the opportunities and the challenges that you face, have to have. It's nothing like the same job as most of your predecessors had. Even just post COVID and the number of people that are coming into churches. And I know, I've read some of your writing about that, both in the positive and the negative. But at the very least, it is certainly jarring a lot of presuppositions about what a parish is and how it ought to function and for whom it ought to be, jarring a lot of those loose, this number of people coming. Anyway, this is not that podcast. That's not what we're here to talk about, but I find it fascinating. So I don't know. I kept on talking when we should be wrapping up. Anything else you want to add about your work at Focus before we move on to actually talk Tolkien?
No, if nothing else, though, just to encourage everybody out there to pray for those we serve and pray with those we serve with as we try to make the Lord's kingdom manifest in more places for more people.
Amen. All right. That's awesome. Congratulations on the wonderful work you've been doing. God grant that it will continue to prosper. So, now, let's get to some of our listener questions and comments. This time, we're going to spend some time catching up on our YouTube comments, and mostly they are dealing with pretty much the same theme, a question we've been discussing the last couple episodes, which is how long should these episodes of these podcasts be? So I think, Steve, you and I can go back and forth on these and comment as we go. Would you read this first one from Jair2435?
Sure. This is a comment from March, and the comment goes, 4 hours? I'm going to finish this room flip today. Let's go. With a lot of O's, some capitalized, some not.
And then you can read the response to him, which may be a little bit targeted. I don't know.
So the response is from Taniku Dog. And they wrote, it's a good 4 hours without blunt derails, laughing every other sentence, and MCU pop cult nerd references every 5 minutes. So shots fired, I suppose.
I'm not sure if that's shots fired against you and Pop Culture Coffee Hour from way back in the day, or Father Andrew, or Father Stephen, or whatever, but I'm gonna, as one who enjoys an MCO and pop culture and nerd reference every 5 minutes and doesn't mind the giggling, I'm still gonna take the compliment.
Yeah, I apologize. You're gonna get a lot of giggling in this episode, so my apologies in advance.
I like the giggling. So, all right, I'll read the next one. This is from Barbara Johnson in March. She says, I would very much like a full poetry episode. We're going to have to work on that, Barbara. And then I could have listened to another 4 hours to Michael Haldas and Father Cook. Well, all compliments there go to Michael Haldas. He's great. But yeah, that was, I think that may hold the record on Ancient Faith right now for the length of a podcast. We almost went to 5 hours. It was crazy.
Wow.
Anyway. Go ahead, Steve.
It is amazing how things have changed. I remember some, early podcasting that we did, and breaking an hour and a half seemed like we were testing people way back in the day, and now 4 and 5 hours is the norm.
Well, and I told Father Andrew, I said, by the way, my latest episode went to 3.5, 4 hours, and he said, you really should consider at that point you should break it into 2 episodes and start the recording over again, which I was thinking about doing, but as of right now, the people have spoken. They like the long episodes. So with apologies to Father Andrew and especially to the producers, I think we're stuck with the format.
Anyway. Marathon editing sessions.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry.
Well, a couple more comments in the positive when it comes to the podcast length. So this one is from Diane Musson, 7988. Please don't shorten the podcasts. I love them just as they are. And Tenuku Dog, again, if you have the wherewithal to put off a 4-hour discussion, just do it. If it's too much to handle, then just say that too. Point is that podcasts and, quote, content creators I've hung on to over the years were the ones that made the content they themselves wish to see and not chasing the algorithm or aping TikTok or, ironically worse, caving into listener demands, which I wholeheartedly co-sign that. As somebody who is creating something beautiful, don't try to do what you imagine some pool of people out there like. If you're not going to like it as the person who's making a thing, don't make it.
Just remember, Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Everybody loved it in the theater because it gave everything that the fans had ever demanded and wanted. And then the fans realized, well, at least a lot of fans realized that they just held up a mirror to us and we don't like what we look like. Our desires are less than pleasing. All right. Anyway, Decky68 said, I absolutely love the long format. I say 5 to 6 hours would be awesome. Father Andrew, I'm sorry. I very much enjoy these discussions, and I'm not in your usual demographic, being a 58-year-old woman. Keep up the great work. All right. So, long form allows us to access, to go beyond the, men in their 20s. So we're doing great.
We are approaching vigil territory at that point. So here's another from Harbinger 359, who in early April said, I just popped in on YouTube. I usually listen on Spotify to chime in on the length because I thought it was important. I noticed the episodes getting longer and I like it. I really have enjoyed the in-depth and sometimes delightfully meandering discussions, which are only possible in a long format. And I feel like this is what podcasts are for anyway. Too much of modern life is fast-paced, so this is a nice change of that. And if I can't listen to a full episode at once, which is often enough, well, I have the power of the pause button, which also gives me something to look forward to for later. As it is, when I do finish listening to an episode, I simply begin waiting for the next one. Which is interesting, right? That is like video and other things have gotten really short and really, really short, that the audio medium has gotten longer. I think it's kind of interesting that they've diverged so strongly.
It makes me wonder because, as human beings, anyone who goes to school and studies anything of ancient history, you get this sense of the oral cultures that preceded, the literary culture that we've effectively been in since the time of Homer, or at least when Homer was written down. And I wonder sometimes, are we moving into something else again with long form? But then again, you and I are just kind of talking, off the cuff. We're not composing poetry that could, remotely potentially last millennia. So we've got a long way to go, I suppose, if our orality is supposed to be going in that direction. But
we'll just keep dropping references to Wine Dark Sea as much as we can.
There we go. That's all that's required. And hang on. What's my favorite line from? I think it's from the Odyssey. I don't remember it in Greek, but Athena is criticizing Zeus for something, and he says, "What is this word that has escaped the fence of your teeth?" or something. Okay, so maybe we need to think about that before we speak too. But anyway.
Good word.
So we actually have a ton of other excellent and fascinating listener comments and emails to read, but somewhat ironically, considering if it is actually irony, I always forget. Anyway, considering what the listeners have just said, we're pressed for time with this episode and we have to move on. I promise I didn't cherry pick. These were just all of the comments on the question of should we be longer or shorter, and everyone says longer. I think that was in response to a listener comment that indicated maybe they were getting a little bit long that we read last time. So I guess as of right now, we have a vote of some 6 or 7 to 1. So dear listener, please weigh in if you have other opinions. I'll at least read them and then probably do what I want to do, which seems like all I can do anyway. Anyway, we are all set up to continue our marathon episodes starting next month. So please feel free to send more comments to us at Amon Sûl at ancientfaith.com. You can message us via the Facebook page. You can comment on YouTube, and you will probably hear your comment on an episode to come. Also, please do remember we are always looking for new photograph submissions of landscapes that resemble Weathertop and the Weather Hills approaching it, so we can feature them on YouTube during the podcast opening there. So if you live or work or commute under the shadow of Amon Sûl, or if you're basically imitating Gandalf in your life choices, Steve, please take some cool photos as you're traveling and send them our way. So this brings us to the main portion of our episode today, and it's only 22 minutes, which is, we're doing great. It's taken us like an hour and a half to get to the main discussion the last several episodes. We brought Steve back to the podcast to discuss the best glimpse we ever get of the House of Elrond and the blessed valley of Rivendell in the chapter Many Meetings. So as always, we'll provide an outline of the chapter here at the beginning, but we urge you all to pause and go back and read the chapter yourselves before we proceed. The outline is just so we're kind of all on the same page. So, go read. Are you back? Excellent. Here's the outline. We start off with Frodo in bed. He wakes up, finds Gandalf there, and tries to convince him to explain what happened and how he got there. They argue for a little while, and we get a striking and rare point of view from Gandalf, who comments somewhat ominously in his own mind that Frodo isn't even halfway through yet. And then we get Gandalf as Paul Harvey, giving the rest of the story, what happened at the ford. That's an old person joke for all of you youngsters. And we get Frodo's nap and second waking, and Sam is there. Any comments on Paul Harvey there, Steve, before I continue? I see you giggling. I miss Paul Harvey. So... Anyway, after Frodo wakes up, the second portion is the feast. So Sam brings Frodo to the others. Pippin hails him as the Lord of the Ring, and Gandalf smacks him down. The feast begins.
Many such cases.
Elrond, Glorfindel, Gandalf, and Arwen are on the dais. Then Frodo is sitting next to Gloin. They have a conversation, but they avoid their most important news. Gloin tells Frodo about all the successes at the Lonely Mountain at Erebor, but he also tells him that Balin has departed. He's not at the mountain anymore. Frodo says he longs to see Bilbo, and hey presto, part 3, the Hall of Fire. Gandalf walks Frodo over to the Hall of Fire, and there they meet Bilbo. Frodo and Bilbo talk for a while together. Bilbo asks to see the ring, and Frodo sees him old and wrinkled through the ring, as it were, and he's deeply disturbed. Bilbo sees his reaction and seems to finally understand the ring is no longer his, and he finally lets go. I think it's one of the more important elements in this chapter, and it's one of those blink and you miss it. Anyway, then part 4, we have Bilbo's song. Aragorn arrives. He and Bilbo go off to work on Bilbo's song for a little while. Frodo dozes off, but he wakes to hear Bilbo chanting this song about Earendel. Then the elves give their review of the song, saying they can't tell what part was Bilbo's and what part was Aragorn's. Bilbo explains privately to Frodo that all Aragorn added was the element about a green stone being carried by Earendel. And that's important, although almost as it's kind of an Easter egg, built in there. And then part 5, bedtime. Frodo and Bilbo decide to slip back to Bilbo's rooms for more talking. They're poetried out. As they leave, they hear a hymn to Elbereth being sung, and then they look back and they see Aragorn and Arwen together. Again, just a little bit of foreshadowing, one of those glimpses we get of what's going to happen at the end of the whole story. In Bilbo's rooms, they talk for a while, but Sam interrupts. He's been sent by Gandalf to make sure Frodo gets good sleep before the council next day. And off to bed Frodo goes. That's what I noticed. Steve, anything you thought was important or notable from the chapter that I missed covering?
No, nothing else for me. That covers it.
All right. So I don't want to monologue too much here, Steve. Jump in anytime you like. But what I find interesting about this chapter is both how little happens. This is just some really long conversations. And it's not an action-packed, and yet it doesn't drag. And then looking at the Tolkien's writing process, it's really striking how little this chapter has changed from the initial drafts. This is sort of the uber nerd perspective, but if you look at the history of Middle Earth, volumes that look like this and have stupid numbers of pages. You get to see Tolkien's writing process, and back to the very original draft from 1939 to 1940. Not much has changed. Now, the number of hobbits present and their names was originally quite different. There was a character called Odo who kept cropping up, and he was originally here along with Merry and Pippin. Merry was mostly called Merry from the beginning, but Pippin's name at the time was either Faramond or even Frodo. At that time, Frodo's name was Bingo. Good change, Tolkien. And, of course, Aragorn wasn't Aragorn. He was a hobbit named Trotter who wore wooden shoes. So there were 5 hobbits present at the time. Bingo/Frodo, Merry, Frodo/Faramond/Pippin, Odo/Fredegar/Hamilcar, and Trotter, whose actual name was Peregrine. So there was no Sam at the time, and his absence makes for a somewhat different chapter as he comes in at some notable, transition points, but doesn't really have any critical lines. But with all that, the essentials of Frodo's waking, Gandalf's explanations, the meal, the reunion with Bilbo in the Hall of Fire, and the pending council, all of these are present. It does seem to have been in the course of writing this chapter amid Gandalf's retrospective reflections on the journey that was just completed by originally Bingo and ultimately Frodo. While thinking about this, trying to figure out what has Gandalf got to say, Tolkien seems to have come to some important conclusions about the nature and the significance of the ring, that it is the one ring, not just some elven ring that Bilbo has or Frodo has. And also some thoughts on the nature of the ring wraiths and the existence of the high elves in both the seen and unseen realms at the same time. We'll talk about those as we go on and actually read the text. But ultimately, this chapter effectively reached its final shape by the end of 1939, maybe the beginning of 1940, which is really striking considering that it took Tolkien several more years to finish the book. The revisions that followed were mostly superficial. I think there are three things that are worth mentioning in particular from the earlier drafts. One of them is an interesting comment that Gandalf made at Bingo or Frodo's bedside, which is worth reading, if only because it bears somewhat on my Tom Bombadil obsession. Steve, would you read this?
Yeah. Things work out oddly. But for that shortcut, you would not have met old Bombadil, nor had the one kind of sword the riders fear. Why did not I think of Bombadil before? If only he was not so far away. I would go straight back now and consult him. We have never had much to do with one another up till now. I don't think he quite approves of me somehow. He belongs to a much older generation, and my ways are not his. He keeps himself to himself and does not believe in travel. But I fancy somehow that we shall all need his help in the end, and that he may have to take an interest in things outside his own country.
Yeah. So, Steve, I've spent the last several episodes, pushing a theory that I can't get out of my head that Tom Bombadil might be one of the Valar, and even a very particular one. And, comments like this in Tolkien's earlier drafts are the sort of thing that make me think, hey, that could be. But other readers, they see that and think, well, no. Older generation, that's like, something completely different. I don't think there's a conclusion. It's interesting to watch Tolkien musing about who Tom Bombadil is, at the very least. Any thoughts you have?
It's also interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, and again, I'm not as deep into the sort of textual tradition of Lord of the Rings as you are, but I kind of wonder because the way that it's phrased is that it seems like it's teeing up some sort of further intersection with the plot, right? Does Bombadil have more of a role in the casting away of the ring and the overthrowing of Sauron and all that sort of stuff? It seems like it. At least it's teeing up some sort of more plot intersection later.
Yeah.
And
I
don't know.
And yet Tolkien. So yeah, exactly. He's clearly playing with this idea. He's considerate. He's thinking maybe we should do that. And we get in the published version, we get people, other people, not Gandalf, suggesting this, in the Council of Elrond, not least. I think, though, that Tolkien, who am I to say he's right? He clearly decides not to do this. He leaves Bombadil out. And there's a letter he writes where he talks about Tom Bombadil as a figure who's effectively taken a vow of poverty. He's not... he's not trying to control other beings. He lives in his own land where he is master. And yet you have that fascinating, beautiful conversation where Goldberry says, yeah, Tom is master. And Frodo says, oh, so does this land and everything in it belong to him? And she says, no, they all belong to themselves. That would be a great burden to have to own these things. And that's the nature of that vow of poverty. So, but I think the interplay, the juxtaposition between Gandalf on the one hand, very active, hands on, hands, in the pot, stirring it up, and Tom Bombadil, very hands off. There if you go to him, but not driving the plot.
Yeah. I don't know if we know this. I wonder if Tolkien had sort of thought about, his theory of like the eucatastrophe, right, as the thing that ultimately resolves the tension at the very end. Is there potentially less space for this if Bombadil becomes too active, right? Because Gandalf is even sort of saying he's kind of at another higher level than me. As strong as Gandalf is, he is still relatively weak, needs to act sort of through his leadership and his cunning, right, to arrange the chess pieces on the board, to inspire Frodo, to make sure it's not Gandalf who takes the walk into Mordor. But is it different if Bombadil, for whatever reason, who seems not immune to the ring, right, at least in the published version, but not susceptible to it, if he just pops it in his pocket and he walks to Mount Doom? I mean, things get very different.
Sure. Yeah. and what happens? There is in the earlier drafts actually a scene where Bombadil confronts the Black Riders, and he basically just tells them, "Go home," well, like you do to a bad dog, and they turn around and they go home because Tom is master, and that doesn't survive. It's written once and then is dispensed with, but in the larger scheme of things, Gandalf is a Maya, so he is at the same rough. I hate talking about it this way. The same rough power level as Sauron, but the way that he approaches it is completely different. He doesn't build an army and a tower and a long-term opposition movement to. He refuses to use the tools of the enemy against him. What would it look like if Tom Bombadil, whoever he is, of an older generation, of a higher level of power than Gandalf, if you will, what does it look like if he goes toe to toe with Sauron? You get hints in the Silmarillion that when the powers fight with the powers, bad things happen for all the small people. The earth is shaken and destroyed, and everything beautiful is crushed because the mighty are fighting, as it were.
And if he was the sort of being who was interested in picking up that fight, then presumably he would be the sort of being who would maybe be more susceptible to the ring, and the outcome would change, right? Exactly.
He is master of himself because he's renounced mastery of anyone else. I honestly really like the juxtaposition, if you'll forgive me, even thinking about this. This just it's got my imagination. Tom Bombadil always has seemed like a monastery or maybe a parish. He's not trying to master or be in charge of anything, but that one space where he doesn't own anything, but he serves and cares for everything. It's a great place to go for a retreat, but then someone else has to go out and actually do the work, in the world. And anyway, I find this little snippet fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, the second thing we should note is the absence of Arwen in the original chapters. Now, Deacon Sarah from Roland noticed a couple episodes ago that Tolkien actually only finalized Arwen's character at the very last minute. The way he told the story, it was like, Tolkien's like running after the postman to get back the manuscript so he can like pencil in these little bits about Arwen. And I'm sure it's not quite that dramatic, but he added her in and apparently and changed Aragorn's name from Trotter to Strider in the final months or weeks or maybe days before the publication of the Fellowship of the Ring. Yes, Strider is better than Trotter. I haven't yet been able to find the details on that, and I need to ask Deacon Seraphim, but it's interesting nonetheless. That she's added in to give us this foreshadowing of Aragorn's wedding and everything else, at the end. So it's not that there is no romance; it's just not the point of the books, basically. Now, the third thing that I want to mention about the earlier drafts is the one that was entirely new to me when I was prepping this episode. And it's part of the reason I was so late getting a script to you. So I'm so sorry again, Steve.
No worries.
It has to do with the poem that Bilbo composes and delivers toward the end of the chapter. And for this, explaining this, I think it's worthwhile just to read the commentary that we get from Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull in the Reader's Companion to The Lord of the Rings. So Steve, would you read the first bit of this, and then I'll continue?
Yeah. Okay, here we go. The long and complex history of this poem is discussed at length by Christopher Tolkien in The Treason of Isengard, Chapter 5. Here, it will suffice to say that probably in the early 1930s, Tolkien wrote a set of verses called Errantry. The earliest extant version begins, quote, "There was a merry passenger, a messenger, an errander," end quote. This developed through 5 further texts until the work was published in the Oxford Magazine for 9 November 1933. When years later, Tolkien wanted a poem for Bilbo to recite at Rivendell in The Lord of the Rings, he developed Errantry further through 15 more texts until it was conserved with Eärendil, a pivotal figure in his mythology. Earlier of these versions begin, quote, "There was a merry messenger," or a variant. The 6 later texts, probably after a long interval of time, begin, quote, "Arendil," or Arendil, different spellings, "was a mariner," end quote. The third version is the second category, was published in The Lord of the Rings in 1954, but 3 more further revised versions followed. Christopher Tolkien believes that these final texts were mislaid by his father and not to be found when the typescript of The Lord of the Rings had to be sent to the publisher, so that a less developed version came into print. And again, a quote here, "as it should not have done. It looks also as if these lost texts did not turn up again until many years had passed, by which time my father no longer remembered the history." That's a quote from The Treason of Isengard, page 103.
Right. So then Hammond and Sûl, they provide the full and final form of the poem. And if you don't have this or know this book, this is the Lord of the Rings. There we go. The Lord of the Rings Companion. And it's got fun notes. Well, fun notes. I find them fun. On everything through the Lord of the Rings. But they provide the full form, the full and final form of the poem. And then they add a few additional notes afterwards, because we'll read the poem together so long as we have time. And if we don't have time, I'll read it by myself. So it will be on the episode, I promise. But they add a few additional notes after the text of the poem. So this, they say, says Christopher Tolkien, is the form in which the poem should have been published. These 2 editors, they were responsible actually for the text of the Lord of the Rings in 2004. So they're saying, when we came to consider the text of the Lord of the Rings for the 2004 edition, we hesitated to replace large portions of the established version of Arendil was a mariner, even with lines very likely to have been preferred by its author. Our policy was to approach all emendations conservatively, and this seemed too great a change to contemplate, let alone to suggest on a much different scale than the correction of clear errors or the alteration of small details for the sake of accuracy or consistency. Also, we felt that we should not ignore the fact that even granting Christopher Tolkien's argument that his father had come to forget its textual history, J.R.R. Tolkien himself had not taken the opportunity to alter Bilbo's song at Rivendell for the 2nd edition in 1965. It's a difficult issue in which one could argue cogently either way, either for replacement or for letting the 1954 text stand, though with minor typographical corrections. In the event, it seems prudent to do the latter, but to discuss the matter here and to include the final version in its entirety, thereby allowing them to have their cake and eat it too. Would you read this last little bit? I marked it for myself, but if you would read it, starting a revision of Errantry.
Yeah. A revision of Errantry was published in 1962 in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil and other verses from the Red Book. In his preface to that book, Tolkien, again in his guise as editor of a Hobbit manuscript, says that Errantry, quote, "was evidently made by Bilbo. This is indicated by its obvious relationship to the long poem recited by Bilbo as his own composition in the House of Elrond. In origin a nonsense rhyme, it is in the Rivendell version found transformed and applied, somewhat incongruously, to the High Elvish and Númenórean legends of Arendil, probably because Bilbo invented its metrical devices and was proud of them. They do not appear in other places in the Red Book. The older form here given must belong to the early days after Bilbo's return from his journey in The Hobbit. Though the influence of Elvish traditions is seen, they are not seriously treated, and the names used, Darylin, Thelemy, Belmarie, Aerie, are mere inventions in the Elvish style and are not, in fact, Elvish at all."
Okay. So all this is delightful to me. I hope to you, Steve, and to you, dear listener, I find it hilarious how Tolkien puts his own feelings, his own experience, his own history with this poem, and he says, "Oh yeah, that's Bilbo. That Bilbo really was proud of the poetic devices. Bilbo was proud of the meter. Bilbo, he stuck it in there where really he's just saying, this is how I feel about this. It's a little goofy, it's a little strange, but I'm inordinately proud of this. I love anyway."
Doesn't it say something? I mean, I don't know how deeply we can get into it and how seriously to take it, but there's a part of me that wonders, what does this say about the artistic process of allowing a work like this to unfold, right? Because we've already talked about the various versions of the many meetings chapter and characters that come and go, right? I mean, there's almost a sense, right? And I say this as somebody who's done a little bit of creative writing and so forth, that there's an element of discovery, right? If it's not simply like your own agenda, but there's a certain, planting of a seed, and then you figure out who this character is and what makes sense to this character as it goes, right? I mean, is Tolkien just kind of allowing himself to be led around by the text? And Bilbo, while not real, has a certain inner coherence that needs to be followed if this is going to make sense, right? I mean, I might do differently as the creator of all of this, but Bilbo is who he is, and we're going to allow this to continue.
Well, exactly, but along with that too, that it's not just the character as a character, external. It's the character as intrinsically connected to the creator, to the author, and this is Tolkien's life work. And and just there's a shy joy that comes across in that last paragraph you read, Steve, of sharing something that is deeply beloved to him, that is incredibly intimate, and has been with him for decades. And he's sharing it, and kind of winking at the audience, like this is really important to me. But I'm also nervous about it. So I'm not going to say, and I'm English, I'm not going to say that it's important to me. I'm going to say it was important to Bilbo, But if you're paying attention, I've just revealed something very, very profound about myself. And along with that, I think the insight is that this is how we work as human beings. We're not just a snapshot. We're not just, a quick, going back to long form or short form media. We're not just a quick, 60-second YouTube short, or a, what is TikTok, 10 seconds, or I don't, or no, that was Vine. If anyone even remembers,
some are longer,
Vine,
some are shorter,
right? Yeah. We have a lifetime, and we grow, we blossom, we season over the course of that lifetime. And it's a joy to get to see someone across time like that, and then see ourselves in it.
Yeah, and a joy to still be invested in this character that he's created all these years. I mean, Bilbo has outlived him, in a sense.
Oh, very much so. And yet, well, this is a terrible idea, but what one gets the sense one could feed Bilbo and other characters into an AI and say, okay, build me an artificial Tolkien. And it would be a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. But it would be terrible because it could actually get close, I'm guessing, to... Anyway, please don't do that. I just said something terrible.
Please don't, yes.
Yeah, all right. Any other thoughts on all this, Steve?
No, but it's delightful. I always love it when there's those layer of creation, right? The play within the play, the poem within the poem. Like, it's really cool to see these layers of creation, creation sort of mediated through other creations. It's fun.
Yeah, and it's a part of Tolkien's creative process that just gives so much depth to it, because he doesn't just throw his drafts away. He makes them part of the textual history within the story, right? And he builds a story around them. Like Bilbo's character is not least defined by the fact that, Tolkien wrote this poem once in the early 30s when his children were, not yet 10 years old. And then he rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it and stuck it into his bigger story and rewrote it some more. And Bilbo's character is not least defined by that creative process that has to belong to someone, not just Tolkien. You could do it artificially and really get some mileage out of it as an author, I think. But Tolkien just seems to have done it naturally. Like he both, gets rid of, he lets it go. He says that's not the final draft, but he lets it be someone else's, first draft, and then builds that reality of his life into the story. It's cool.
He must have had a wonderful office to poke around in.
Yes. Someone actually published a few years ago a book called Tolkien's Library, and all it is just a list of the books that Tolkien had on his shelves.
Really?
Yeah. I've got it over on the shelf somewhere. I think I flipped through it. I was like, okay, this is cool, and now it can go on the bookshelf. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with this? Someday, maybe I'll use it. All right,
You referenced it just now.
I did. That's true. Yeah, I got the payoff. All right, there's one more humorous variant in the very original version. I believe the original with that had Trotter the Hobbit rather than Aragorn the Númenórean, the Dunedain. Trotter was still absent from the feast, just as Aragorn eventually is. Now, in the final version, the published version, Aragorn was absent because he was consulting with the sons of Elrond who had just come back from some travels. But in the original, Trotter was absent from the table because he was much in demand in the kitchens, as he apparently possessed great skill in the culinary arts. And I think that's delightful.
That's one of those things again, right? That Tolkien is just as compelling and convincing writing about these matters of grand strategy, and his loving descriptions of the wreaths of smoke that come out of the tobacco pipe. Exactly. And the high and the low, the big and the small,
but deeply rooted and grounded either way.
Mm-hmm.
All right. With that, I think it's time we get into the chapter. I think we're making good time. Well, we'll start with the very beginning, remembering that we last left Frodo at the end of a flight to the ford as he swooned at the ford as the flood came down and washed the Black Riders away. So, Steve, would you begin reading this for us?
Yeah. Frodo woke and found himself lying in bed. At first, he thought that he had slept late, after a long, unpleasant dream that still hovered on the edge of memory. Or perhaps he had been ill. But the ceiling looked strange. It was flat and had dark beams richly carved. He lay a little while longer, looking at patches of sunlight on the wall and listening to the sound of a waterfall. "Where am I? And what is the time?" he said aloud to the ceiling. "In the House of Elrond, and it is 10 o'clock in the morning," said a voice. "It is the morning of October the 24th, if you want to know." "Gandalf!" cried Frodo, jumping up. There was the old wizard, sitting in a chair by the open window. "Yes," he said, "I am here. And you are lucky to be here too, after all the absurd things you have done since you left home." Frodo lay down again. He felt too comfortable and peaceful to argue, and in any case he did not think he would get the better of an argument. He was fully awake now, and the memory of his journey was returning. The disastrous shortcut through the old forest, the accident at the Prancing Pony, and his madness in putting on the ring in the dell under Weathertop. While he was thinking of all these things and trying in vain to bring his memory down to his arriving in Rivendell, there was a long silence, broken only by the soft puffs of Gandalf's pipe as he blew white smoke rings out of the window. "Where's Sam?" Frodo asked at length. "And are the others all right?" "Yes, they are all safe and sound," answered Gandalf. "Sam was here until I sent him off to get some rest, about half an hour ago." "What happened at the ford?" said Frodo. "It all seemed so dim, somehow, and it still does." "Yes, it would. You were beginning to fade," answered Gandalf. "The wound was overcoming you at last. A few more hours and you would have been beyond our aid. But you have some strength in you, my dear hobbit, as you showed in the barrow. That was touch and go, perhaps the most dangerous moment of all. I wish you could have held out at Weathertop." "You seem to know a great deal already," said Frodo. "I have not spoken to the others about the barrow. At first it was too horrible, and afterwards there were other things to think about. How do you know about it?" "You have talked long in your sleep, Frodo," said Gandalf gently, "and it has not been hard for me to read your mind and memory. Do not worry. Though I said absurd just now, I did not mean it. I think well of you, and of the others. It is no small feat to have come so far, and through such dangers, still bearing the ring."
Yeah, so there's a lot to notice here, but I think the impression that I come away with, more even than all the details that are fascinating, is just how well Tolkien evokes the peace that Frodo somehow managed to regain after the horror of his last consciousness, the last time he was awake, simply by being in the House of Elrond. Rationally, he's still troubled by everything that's happened, but he doesn't seem traumatized, at least not overtly so. What do you think of this passage, Steve?
Yeah, I wonder how much of it is the House of Elrond, how much of it is the resilience that hobbits seem to have, in this story. But the contrast is striking, right? Like, because you're picturing him, and I admit there's a part of my mental picturing is what we see sort of depicted in the movie, right? The fluffy sheets and the big bed. I mean, this image of pure comfort, and then even the connection to the barrow, which we don't get as much of in the films, right? This like laying in the bed versus being underground in a tomb, right? I mean, it's a very sort of stark contrast. The light streaming in, and Gandalf's smoke sort of playing in the sunbeams again versus that darkness. It gives me a shiver, and yet Frodo sort of moves beyond it pretty quick.
Yeah, you latched on to that, and I hadn't caught that. But yeah, we see Frodo wake up a few times. He wakes up in the house of Tom Bombadil, I think. Mm-hmm. Well, we see him wake up in the house in Crickhollow, but those are very different because he's woken out of a dream. But this description of him waking up and not being quite sure where he is, that happens a couple times, but it does happen in the barrow. And Gandalf's mentioning of the barrow as the most dangerous moment encourages that connection, and that's really fascinating. The different ways of waking into more horror and waking out of horror again. Huh?
Yeah. Waking into a peace that is so sure that you don't need to know where you are. Like, all you know is that you are safe in that moment.
Right. And just lying there quietly, being awake, but not talking yet. And then talking, he said aloud to the ceiling, "Where am I? And what time is it?"
I long to be so unrushed and untroubled.
Oh, my word. Yes. But then Gandalf's voice is the one that answers. Gandalf, who's been absent for the whole, terrifying stress of this journey, he's been waiting for and looking for, and now here he is. So
yeah, and you really get a deeper sense of the character of Gandalf, right? On the one hand, you have a sense of the cunning and the strength that is beneath the exterior of this, broad-shouldered but still old man. That he knows a lot. Like, he might not be there, but he's able to figure a lot of stuff out. But he also does care deeply. Mm-hmm. He's not just this chess player that is maneuvering the pieces around with this agenda. Like, he actually does have a soft spot for Frodo them. And the other hobbits. Yeah.
He's not using them. He's guiding them and urging them. It's a point that's been really profoundly striking to me as I've been doing this read through the last year and a half, basically now, how much respect Gandalf shows, how much trust Gandalf gives to Frodo specifically. Because it's shocking. It's shocking in any rational framework. Gandalf knows exactly what the ring is, what it can do, who is looking for it, but he leaves the choice at every point. He leaves the decision to Frodo. He does not manhandle his will. It's anyway, it's incredible. And here again, there's that gentleness, and he teases, he calls him absurd, and then he immediately unsays it. I said it, but I don't mean it.
Yeah, apologetically. I mean, can you imagine any of the villains in this story apologizing or trusting or loving, a being so small and so insignificant?
Yeah, it's incredible. We'll see more of this as we go on, but this question of what was happening to Frodo, that he was beginning to fade. He was almost beyond their aid. It's one of the major underlying factors of the whole story. What is a ring wraith? What is a wraith? What are the elves? How do they function? And this chapter really gives us as much as we get anywhere within the published Lord of the Rings of this question. And it's an interesting one to reflect on. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on. We could pull more out of this, but I know we're conscious of the time. So after this, they have a delightful little argument in which Frodo persistently presses for more information about what happened, and Gandalf declines to give it, while at the same time telling him and us a great deal about the world and what Frodo is asking about. So we hear that Gandalf was held captive, and we hear a lot more about the ring wraiths, and we hear Frodo's ignorant thoughts about the big people all being stupid. And we hear Gandalf's retort and his clear explanation of who Aragorn is, that he is of the line of kings from over the sea, as are all the Rangers, the men of the West. And we hear as well Frodo's been stabbed with a Morgul knife. A shard remained in the wound, and Elrond only found it the night before, just a few hours before Frodo woke. And then we have this passage immediately after, which tells us a lot about both the ring wraiths and the elves. Would you start this, Steve, and then I'll continue so you can comment first.
Sure. Frodo shuddered, remembering the cruel knife with notched blade that had vanished in Strider's hands. "Don't be alarmed," said Gandalf. "It is gone now. It has been melted, and it seems that hobbits fade very reluctantly. I have known strong warriors of the big people who would quickly have been overcome by that splinter, which you bore for 17 days. "What would they have done to me?" asked Frodo. What were the riders trying to do?" "They tried to pierce your heart with a Morgul knife which remains in the wound. If they had succeeded, you would have become like they are, only weaker and under their command. You would have become a wraith under the dominion of the Dark Lord, and he would have tormented you for trying to keep his ring. If any greater torment were possible than being robbed of it and seeing it on his hand." "Thank goodness I did not realize this horrible danger," said Frodo faintly. "I was mortally afraid, of course, but if I had known more, I should not have dared even to move. It is a marvel that I escaped." "Yes, fortune or fate have helped you," said Gandalf, "not to mention courage. For your heart was not touched, and only your shoulder was pierced. And that was because you resisted to the last. But it was a terribly narrow shave, so to speak. You were in gravest peril while you wore the ring, for then you were half in the wraith world yourself, and they might have seized you. You could see them, and they could see you." "I know," said Frodo. "They were terrible to behold, but why could we all see their horses?" "Because they are real horses, just as the black robes are real robes that they wear to give shape to their nothingness when they have dealings with the living." "Then why do these black horses endure such riders? All other animals are terrified when they draw near, even the elf horse of Glorfindel. The dogs howl and the geese scream at them." "Because these horses are born and bred to the service of the Dark Lord in Mordor. Not all his servants and chattels are wraiths. There are orcs and trolls, there are wargs and werewolves, and there have been and still are many men, warriors and kings, that walk alive under the sun, and yet are under his sway, and their number is growing daily."
So I'll continue just directly from there. What about Rivendell and the elves? Is Rivendell safe? Yes, at present, until all else is conquered. The elves may fear the Dark Lord, and they may fly before him, but never again will they listen to him or serve him. And here in Rivendell there live still some of his chief foes, the Elven-wise, lords of the Eldar from beyond the furthest seas. They do not fear the ring-wraiths, for those who have dwelt in the Blessed Realm live at once in both worlds, and against both the seen and the unseen they have great power. I thought that I saw a white figure that shone and did not grow dim like the others. Was that Glorfindel then? Yes, you saw him for a moment as he is upon the other side, one of the mighty of the firstborn. He is an elf lord of a house of princes. Indeed, there is a power in Rivendell to withstand the might of Mordor for a while, and elsewhere other powers still dwell. There is power, too, of another kind in the Shire, but all such places will soon become islands under siege if things go on as they are going. The Dark Lord is putting forth all his strength.
I find the detail about the horses to be particularly unnerving, I guess. This reaction by Frodo that natural animals, right, the horses of the elves, they all have this aversion to evil, and yet somehow these beasts, right, which are, I don't know what you want to say, good, neutral, whatever they are in and of themselves, can be born and bred by the Dark Lord and become numb to the evil that they're immersed in at all the time, right? But that they can actually physically bear these foul creatures, whereas the geese, will scream at them. There's something, I don't know, sad and horrifying about that.
Yeah, that the corruption of a human being can extend to the corruption of the physical world at large, uh, perhaps, even to another living being.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is, in a sense, the core of the creepiness. Well, creepiness is not the word. Um, um,
It's a bit creepy.
well, I mean, I was going to say creepy is not strong enough. More, but I was reading to my daughter actually, from further along in Lord of the Rings when they come to Minas Morgul, and the way it's described, as originally being, this beautiful city that Isildur builds, that shines with the light of the moon, and then it becomes corrupted over effectively 1,600 years, I guess, to this horrific undead city is of a similar sort of terror and horror, but a living horse that should be warm and have a wholesome smell to it, and have a personality that one can have a relationship with. I'm not a horse person, but I've known horse people, right? I heard
Yeah.
them talk about horses, but to see that corrupted, that perverted to something that no longer reacts to overt wrongness and evil. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just the entree, right? Because then he goes and he lists all of the creatures, and there's the list of the bad ones, right? The orcs and the trolls, but he kind of sadly says, but it's men too. It's not just horses that are corrupted. It's men who voluntarily, though, unlike a horse, which is simply bred, in the stables of Mordor, men have a choice, right? And their number is growing daily, which is such a bleak statement.
Yeah. Men who choose to serve with strength rather than fight against it. Yeah, I don't need to go further down that road, but we know these human beings will do this. We will serve and ally ourselves with the strong man, or the strong whatever, because it seems
beneficial.
The efficient, thing to do. But I want to dig a little more into this interesting question of the seen and the unseen realm, because Tolkien, if I'm not misreading, he talks about Frodo as being half in the Wraith world, and the Wraith world is framed that way. Seems like a bad thing. I mean, the Ring Wraiths, it's where they dwell. They're invisible, not because their visibleness is obscured, like in Harry Potter with a cloak, but because they are no longer present in the world, in the land of the living, in the realm of the seen. They have passed over into a spiritual realm where they ought not be because they've never died. And that is a twisted and perverse thing. But then simultaneously, we talk about Glorfindel existing simultaneously in the seen and the unseen realm. So I think the unseen realm is the same as the Wraith world, and yet not, because Glorfindel is there naturally and appropriately, where the Wraiths are there unnaturally. It's an interesting framing of it, and part of me really wants to do a deep dive and understand Tolkien's thinking, and play the modern fantasy world building. How does this work, and what are the rules of all of this? And the other really wants to align with Tolkien and refuse to dig too deeply into the arts of the enemy. But I'm curious your thoughts on this, especially because you're on record in a number of other places talking about re-enchantment, and the secular versus the larger world in which we actually live. And I'm guessing you have a lot to say about this.
I have a lot to say about too much, which is probably a spiritual weakness of mine. I think because I think it's I think it's reasonable to try to wrestle with some of this as a Christian, because Tolkien, of course, was a Christian, right? And I think there's probably parallels here between elves being somewhat angelic, right, and having this kind of sense of having a role to play in the visible world, but also having a kind of natural footing in the unseen world, and the unnaturalness, the perversity of. Forgive me if I'm confusing it, right? Like in the books as well as in the movies, because now I'm confused. I might be confused. The wraiths are men, right? Corrupted men.
Yeah.
So, men who, although we sort of bear that mark of the unseen within us more properly on a day-to-day basis, kind of walk around in the visible world, right? That the wraiths now become sort of more properly navigating the unseen world is a sign of their corruption and the weirdness of it, right? Like even the point that you meant reading forward about the moon, how the light of the moon can be both soft and glowing and a light in the darkness, but also sickly and wan, right? Depending on the posture with which you approach it, right? It seems to be the same place, or I think you can at least make a reasonable argument that it's the same place, but is it natural and wholesome, or is it corrupted in some sort of way?
Right.
And I think maybe there's something there about human beings, right? Because I think my posture to the sort of seen and unseen, which again actually kind of goes back to work, right? Is that there is so much that is right within our faces, and I think that a substantial portion of this kind of posture towards re-enchantment is not necessarily trying to like peer behind the veil and to see these invisible things, but to sort of properly see visible things. Mm-hmm. Right. As a Christian, to be able to look at if you could look every person that you encounter and see Christ in them, like that's re-enchantment much more than being able to see, winged beings sort of like, flitting about in the heavens.
Right. And as you're talking, I'm remembering, I think this was the Justin Brierley podcast, but he was talking about the surprising rebirth of belief in God podcast there. But he did an episode talking about effectively people who have supernatural experiences by means of drugs. And as I think about it, what we're seeing with the ring wraiths resonates a lot with that. Like you can access, it's possible for us as human beings to access the unseen world artificially by force, but it's not healthy. It's not right. Yeah. We're not, it's not correct. Never mind that, like, I don't doubt that the saints are conscious. They're living in both worlds, as it were. We see the scene in, is it Second Kings with Elisha in the city with his servants, and the enemy king is surrounding the city, and Elisha says, those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Give him eyes to see, and he sees the whole army of God. But Elisha sees it all the time. He's walking in both the seen and the unseen world at the same time. So are we, but we're unconscious of the unseen world. I don't know if it works to just apply reality to what Tolkien is doing, and yet I find it's usually safer to try to do that than get into the world building and what kind of cool, weird, unrealistic stuff is he doing? Because it's more terrifying if we think, okay, the wraiths, by means of being stretched and subjugated to Sauron, they've gained access to that spiritual realm, but at the cost of their normal existence in the physical reality, and they live off of domination and corruption of others in the same manner, and they're always under the domination of this of the will of Sauron. The most scary part of this is when I think we realize this isn't actually fantasy. This part isn't actually pretend at all. This is just what human beings in service to evil will do. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on that road, but
I think it's a good one.
I think that's effectively what we're being presented with. And And that image of what the ring does, it gives you access to the spiritual realm. It takes you out of the physical realm at the cost of your humanity. And coming back to what you said, the way to re-enchant our world is not by trying to see the unseen. It's by living authentically and deeply as we are right now, and ultimately then walking the path of repentance and of theosis, which is the only right way in which we as human beings can become like God. But never by seizing it ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, doesn't this tie right back to Bombadil, right? Who is not curious about going out. He just sort of tends his garden, and he lives this remarkably mundane life for somebody who is such a master.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. That's actually helpful. I didn't. Thank you. That's maybe the best understanding I've had of what's going on with the rings and the ring wraiths and Tolkien's understanding. And yeah, it really is basically just the real world. Yeah.
Which is one reason why these books, they're fiction, right? But they're true on some level. Like they're presenting us images of something that is real, even if it's not. Like there's layers to truth, right? It's not literally true, but there's a truth there.
Yeah, and therefore, whatever we might think of the elves, we'll do best if we think of them basically as saints, because that's how they function. That's how they exist in the world. All right. Finally, then, we have a very rare point. Not finally, we have more to do, but for this scene, finally, we have a very rare point of view from Gandalf himself as Frodo continues to press for more information. Would you read this, Steve?
Yeah. Gandalf moved his chair to the bedside and took a good look at Frodo. The color had come back to his face, and his eyes were clear and fully awake and aware. He was smiling, and there seemed to be little wrong with him. But to the wizard's eye, there was a faint change, just a hint, as it were, of transparency about him, and especially about the left hand that lay outside upon the coverlet. Still, that must be expected, said Gandalf to himself. He is not half through yet, and to what he will come in the end, not even Elrond can foretell. Not to evil, I think. He may become like a glass filled with a clear light for eyes to see that can.
All right, so there's a lot we can say about this, and I'm going to start with the nitpicky stuff. Because at the deeper level, I'm not really sure what to say. One nitpicky thing is, how is it that Elrond's foresight exceeds Gandalf's? That's an interesting question. And then another, even more nitpicky question: how does this comment get into the text in the first place? Because within the frame narrative, this is the Red Book of Westmarch. It's written by Frodo as the sequel to Bilbo's writings, and it has edits and additions added by Sam and other hands, whether of Pippin or of the chroniclers in Minas Tirith or whatever down the line. Who told Frodo or Sam or the others what Gandalf thought to himself at this moment? How did they get this? I would like to ask Tolkien this question, frankly, and he would. I don't know what he would say. But all of that is the nitpicky, because there's stuff in here that is really compelling, especially in light of what we were just saying. What do you think of this, Steve?
So the way that I think about this is this goes back to the point that you just made about kind of seeing the elves as saintly beings, right? Who are kind of navigating these two worlds. But then, of course, again, this is not sort of like fully on point, right? With kind of our understanding of the cosmos, but the saints are sort of like, abandoning Middle Earth and sort of moving, to the Undying Lands. And Frodo is invited to go with them, right? And he is somebody who goes from this very mundane, in that earthly sense of the word, being to Gandalf is positing that he might very well become this like a glass filled with clear light for eyes that can see, right? There becomes something sort of super substantial about him as he grows and matures, and he becomes the kind of person who can actually go to the West with these saints. I wonder, is this something that Gandalf whispers to Sam at some point before he leaves? Is he saying, oh yes, I saw this actually early on, that it was both a consequence of the wound, but also maybe a consequence of his response to his wound and his heroism, right? Is it the Morgul blade that is doing this, or is it the sacrifice of Frodo, who is essentially giving his life, for the salvation of the world, like taking this ring to its destruction at the risk of his own destruction, that is turning him ethereal in a sense?
Sure. First, I have a thought. Maybe Gandalf said something like this to Aragorn, and maybe long after Frodo's departure, we know that that Aragorn does come and meet with Sam on the bridge because he doesn't come into the Shire, and maybe Aragorn shared that with Sam as a matter of encouragement and comfort, because Sam, seeing Frodo go into the West, knowing the trauma, knowing the pain, knowing that he wasn't feeling like he was healed, maybe that's the sort of thing Aragorn might pass on from Gandalf. That at least is viable to me. It's not the thing to focus on. What I like is this sense that Frodo has been corrupted. He's been dragged into this false and perverse approach to the unseen world by the ring itself, and still more by the Morgul blade. And yet Gandalf is saying he has been healed. He's not been twisted. Effectively, he hasn't been turned to evil. But he remains marked. He remains marked, and he remains now more conscious than he by rights ought to be by the unseen world. Before he's ready, he hasn't gone through a process of ascesis, if you will, and yet he is in this conflict, and we can call it spiritual warfare. He is on a path of struggle, of temptation, of attack, but it will work for his purification, is perhaps what we can read. Gandalf is saying. So yeah, he can go to the West, perhaps not because he's now become worthy of it, although there is that, but also because he needs to go to the West to finally be healed. Interesting.
The deeper healing, not just this like temporary healing. Right.
Reintegrated so that he can die. He's still going to die. And yet he's becoming, well, as we said, he's becoming saintly. He's conscious of more than normally he would be.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hate to rush us along.
So Frodo's almost like a Lazarus figure.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I like that very much. All right. We might ought to skip this because we have not a lot of time left, but I don't want to. So let's move forward. So Sam comes after Frodo, takes another nap, and they rejoin the other hobbits, and then they're all summoned to the feast. Now, the description of the Hall of Feasting is just beautiful to me. Would you begin reading this, Steve, and then I'll continue so you can comment first.
Yes. The Hall of Elrond's house was filled with folk, elves for the most part, though there were a few guests of other sorts. Elrond, as was his custom, sat in a great chair at the end of the long table upon the dais. And next to him on the one side sat Glorfindel, on the other side sat Gandalf. Frodo looked at them in wonder, for he had never before seen Elrond, of whom so many tales spoke. And as they sat upon his right hand and his left, Glorfindel and even Gandalf, whom he thought he knew so well, were revealed as lords of dignity and power. Gandalf was shorter in stature than the other two, but his long white hair, his sweeping silver beard, and his broad shoulders made him look like some wise king of ancient legend. In his aged face, under great snowy brows, his dark eyes were set like coals that could leap suddenly into fire. Glorfindel was tall and straight. His hair was of shining gold, his face fair and young and fearless and full of joy. His eyes were bright and keen, and his voice like music. On his brow sat wisdom, and in his hand was strength. The face of Elrond was ageless, neither old nor young, though in it was written the memory of many things, both glad and sorrowful. His hair was dark as the shadows of twilight, and upon it was set a circlet of silver. His eyes were gray as a clear evening, and in them was a light like the light of stars. Venerable he seemed as a king crowned with many winters, and yet hale as a tried warrior in the fullness of his strength. He was the lord of Rivendell, and mighty among both elves and men.
And as I read this, I'm actually going to share a piece of fan art moving on, just because this scene stuck in my memory. But so I'll talk about this. You should be able to see this as well, Steve. All right. So in the middle of the table, against the woven cloths upon the wall, there was a chair under a canopy, and there sat a lady fair to look upon, and so like was she in form of womanhood to Elrond, that Frodo guessed she was one of his close kindred. Young she was, and yet not so. The braids of her dark hair were touched by no frost, her white arms and clear face were flawless and smooth, and the light of stars was in her bright eyes. Grey as a cloudless night, yet queenly she looked, and thought and knowledge were in her glance as of one who has known many things that the years bring. Above her brow her head was covered with a cap of silver lace, netted with small gems glittering white, but her soft grey raiment had no ornament, save a girdle of leaves wrought in silver. So it was that Frodo saw her whom few mortals had yet seen, Arwen, daughter of Elrond, in whom it was said that the likeness of Luthien had come on earth again, and she was called Undomil, for she was the even star of her people. Long she had been in the land of her mother's kin in Lorien, beyond the mountains, and was but lately returned to Rivendell to her father's house. But her brothers Elladan and Elrohir were out upon errantry, for they rode often far afield with the rangers of the north, forgetting never their mother's torment in the dens of the orcs. Such loveliness in living thing Frodo had never seen before nor imagined in his mind, and he was both surprised and abashed to find that he had a seat at Elrond's table among all these folk so high and fair. Though he had a suitable chair and was raised upon several cushions, he felt very small and rather out of place, but that feeling quickly passed. The feast was merry, and the food all that his hunger could desire. It was some time before he looked again about him, or even turned to his neighbors. Now, I want to discuss this, but before we move on, I have to note, way back in the 90s, as I was searching the internet for Tolkien art when I first got access to the internet, I found a lot of scans of different, art from Ted Nasmith and Howe and who's the other one? Anyway, but I found an image, the one I just shared, of Arwen that I think was made to match this description that I thought was just about perfect. It has defined my headcanon of her appearance all the way through the movies. I'm sorry, Liv Tyler was fine, but that's not what Arwen looks like. I've not been able to find the original that I got it from anywhere since, and Google Lens misidentifies it now as a depiction of Lady Macduff. My memory is it was explicitly identified as fan art of Arwen. It may just not be on the internet any longer, which is actually really encouraging that can happen. I don't know who made it. I take my hat off to them, whoever they are. And if anyone knows, but anyway, I now have access to the internet at large, and I can say if anyone knows who did this, I'd like to give them credit and thank them, because it's a neat image of dignity and beauty that isn't remotely sexualized, which is rare and wonderful. Anyway, this whole scene, what do you think, Steve?
First, it's beautiful, right? I mean, you get a sense of Tolkien's fluency with the language, and he just paints this very vivid scene. Like you can see the characters that he's displaying, right? Even if you don't have access to a drawing or a movie still or something like that. So that's the first thing that really it's just a delight to read. The second is the depth of the characters. Like it's really something to see these idealized sort of nobles who, what's that line about Glorfindel that on his brow sat wisdom and in his hand was strength, right? There's kind of an inner and an outer strength that these characters possess. There is both wisdom and virtue and stateliness, this kind of, intangible inner something, but they're also mighty in battle as they need to be, right? Strong both within and without, navigating this seen and unseen realm, and kind of masters, or not masters, but dominant, I guess, in both.
Yeah. They're whole beings. I would say human beings, but they're not all human. Only Elrond is remotely close to that. But they're integrated, they're whole, they're right with themselves and the world. that doesn't mean that they can dominate everything around them. But it's beautiful. We should move on. I'll just let you have the main word on that. We could talk for hours on it. So during the feast, Frodo converses at length with Gloin, and then afterward, the entire throng moves to the Hall of Fire, where Frodo is reunited with Bilbo. They talk about many things, but eventually their conversation turns to the ring, and Bilbo asks to see it. Would you read this rather troubling scene, Steve? It begins with Bilbo speaking and quoting Gandalf.
Yeah. Gandalf said, "The ring has passed on, Bilbo. It would do no good to you or to others if you tried to meddle with it again." Odd sort of remark, just like Gandalf. But he said he was looking after you, so I let things be. I'm frightfully glad to see you safe and sound. He paused and looked at Frodo doubtfully. Have you got it here? He asked in a whisper. I can't help feeling curious, after all I've heard. I should very much like just to peep at it again. Yes, I've got it, answered Frodo, feeling a strange reluctance. It looks just the same as it ever did. Well, I should just like to see it for a moment, said Bilbo. When he had dressed, Frodo found that while he slept, the ring had been hung about his neck in a new chain, light but strong. Slowly he drew it out. Bilbo put out his hand, but Frodo quickly drew back the ring. To his distress and amazement, he found that he was no longer looking at Bilbo. A shadow seemed to have fallen between them, and though through it he found himself eyeing a little wrinkled creature with a hungry face and bony, groping hands. He felt a desire to strike him. The music and singing around them seemed to falter, and a silence fell. Bilbo looked quickly at Frodo's face and passed his hand across his eyes. I understand now, he said. Put it away. I'm sorry you have come in for this burden. Sorry about everything. Don't adventures ever have an end? I suppose not. Someone else always has to carry on the story. Well, it can't be helped. I wonder if it's any good trying to finish my book. But don't let's worry about it now. Let's have some real news. Tell me all about the Shire.
So I have two thoughts here, and then I want yours. First, as you read this, it crossed my mind. This is what changes Frodo's mind about Gollum. Originally, he says, pity that Bilbo didn't strike him dead at the moment. But when he encounters him, there's not even a question of how Frodo will treat Gollum. He gives him every opportunity. And I'd never caught it, but I think this is why. He sees Bilbo and how he's been changed by the ring. And for Bilbo's sake, he has pity on Gollum. That's my new theory as of 20 seconds ago.
Well, because the physical description sounds like it, right? The bony fingers and the wrinkled face. And yeah, I like that.
But,
hungry face.
Bilbo's reaction here it really strikes me. It's deeply sad. In a sense, in a real sense, I think it's the last time we see him in a genuine way. It's a kind of a goodbye to the character from The Hobbit. We see him other times, but everywhere else he's kind of projecting a certain image or persona of confidence or bravado, or let's give me some real news. I know what a hobbit's supposed to, but this is a real and heart-wrenching moment. We see him, let go of the ring. We see him let go of being the hero of the story. And what's left to him is he's grieving what he's passed on to Frodo. He's grieving that, Frodo has to carry on his failures. And it's in this moment where we see him effectively as an addict, just craving one more hit of the thing.
Yeah.
And anyway, your thoughts, Steve?
It really, I think, underscores the magnitude of the fact that he was able to let the ring go in the first place, right? Which, as we see, is not something that most of the characters who've come across the ring do, right? I mean, and the fact that it still has its grip on him, right? Addict actually is a good way of putting it, because you're never fully healed from being an addict, right? As it goes, you're always kind of an addict in recovery. Yeah. And here he is in the last homely house, in this place of safety, surrounded by all these stately lords and virtuous people, and yet even in the midst of this enclave of goodness in a rising sea of darkness outside, there is still a darkness within him that is just festering. And has he thought about the ring? How much has he thought about the ring, right? Or is it just this dormant thing that when he comes face to face with it, he reaches out again and has to have it?
Yeah. And what a blessing that Frodo sees him and withdraws, and he's able to recognize. He's like, I understand now. I feel like that's some of the biggest three words in the whole book. Like, Bilbo understands. He sees himself even as Frodo sees him.
Yeah. So here's a thought that I have about that too. Is it, if Bilbo were younger and stronger, would he have made a play to try to take the ring back? Something that we kind of parse out theologically is like, death is a thing that is given to us for our salvation, right? The garments of skin.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if in this moment, Bilbo's fatigue and weakness, he's the old guy in the corner and he's thinking, but he's potentially sleeping, as Elrond likes to joke. Like, is his physical weakness in that moment actually something that allows him to stake it? Because he's not going to wrestle it out of Frodo's hand at this point, right? Like, does his frailty and his mortality actually allow him to be? Is it part of the factors that allows him to let go and see himself?
I like that thought, and I think you're exactly right, because also at the Council of Elrond, he makes another play. He's like, I understand Bilbo the Silly Hobbit started things, and Bilbo the Silly Hobbit had better finish it. When do I start? And he's treated with respect. Everyone's very grave, but they also say, this is passed from you, Bilbo. Don't try to take it back again. I like that. All right. We need to move on. So,
let's do it.
After this in the story, Aragorn comes in. Bilbo and he go off to work on poetry while Frodo dozes. And then Frodo awakens to hear Bilbo chanting the poem. I'd like to toss the dice, Steve, and go ahead and read this together, and we'll just make it work.
Let's do it.
So this is the poem we talked about previously, the one where the wrong version was published in the Fellowship of the Ring. So we're going to read Tolkien's final version, Bilbo's Best, with Aragorn's input. So we'll go back and forth, but you should begin, Steve.
Yeah. Arundel was a mariner that tarried in Arvernian. He built a boat of timber felled in Nimbrethil to journey in. Her sails he wove of silver fair, and with silver were her banners sewn. Her prow he fashioned like the swans that white upon the phallus roam.
His coat that came from ancient kings of chained rings was forged of old. His shining shield all wounds defied, with runes entwined of dwarven gold. His bow was made of dragon horn, his arrows shorn of ebony. Of triple steel his habergeon, his scabbard of chalcedony. His sword was like a flame in sheath, with gems was wreathed his helmet tall. An eagle plume upon his crest, upon his breast an emerald.
Beneath the moon and under star, he wandered far from northern strands, bewildered on enchanting ways beyond the days of mortal lands. From gnashing of the narrow ice where shadow lies on frozen hills, from neither heats and burning waste he turned in haste, and roving still on starless waters far astray, at last he came to night of naught, and passed, and never sight he saw of shining shore nor light he sought. The winds of fear came driving him, and blindly in the foam he fled, from west to east, and errandless, unheralded, he homeward sped.
In might, the Feanorians that swore the unforgotten oath brought war into Arvernian with burning and with broken troth. An Elwing from her fastness dim then cast her in the waters wide, but like a mew was swiftly borne uplifted o'er the roaring tide. Through hopeless night she came to him, and flame was in the darkness lit, more bright than light of diamond the fire upon her carcanet. The Silmaril she bound on him, and crowned him with the living light, and dauntless then, with burning brow, he turned his prow at middle night, beyond the world, beyond the sea. Then strong and free a storm arose, a wind of power in Tarmanel, by paths that seldom mortal goes, from middle earth on mighty breath, as flying wraith across the grey and long forsaken seas distressed. From east to west he passed away.
Through ever night he back was borne on black and roaring waves that ran o'er leagues unlit and foundering shores that drowned before the days began, until he heard on strands of pearl where ends the world the music long, where ever foaming billows roll the yellow gold and jewels wan. He saw the mountains silent rise where twilight lies upon the knees of Valinor, and Eldamar beheld afar beyond the seas. A wanderer escaped from night, to haven white he came at last. To elven home, the green and fair, where keen the air, where pale as grass beneath the hill of Ilmarin, a glimmer in a valley sheer, the lamplit towers of Tirion are mirrored on the shadow mirror.
He tarried there from errantry, and melodies they taught to him, and sages old him marvels told, and harps of gold they brought to him. They clothed him then in elven white, and 7 lights before him sent, as through the Calakirion to hidden land forlorn he went. He came unto the timeless halls, where shining fall the countless years, and endless reigns the elder king, forever king on mountain sheer. And words unheard were spoken then of folk, of men, and elven kin. Beyond the world where visions showed, forbid to those that dwell therein.
A ship then new they built for him, of mithril and of elven glass, with crystal keel. No shaven oar nor sail she bore, on silver mast the Silmaril as lantern light, and banner bright with living flame. Of fire unstained by Elbereth himself was set, who thither came and wings immortal made for him, and laid on him undying doom, to sail the shoreless skies and come behind the sun and light of moon.
From ever even's lofty halls, where softly silver fountains fall, his wings him bore, a wandering light beyond the mighty mountain wall. From world's end then he turned away, and yearned again to find afar his home, through shadows journeying, and burning as an island star. On high above the mists he came, a distant flame before the sun, a wonder ere the waking dawn, where grey the Norland waters run.
And over Middle Earth he passed, and heard at last that weeping sore of women and of elven maids in elder days, in years of yore. But on him mighty doom was laid, till moon should fade, an orbit star to pass, and tarry nevermore on hither shores where mortals are. Till end of days on errand high, a herald bright that never rests, to bear his burning lamp afar, the flamifer of Westerness.
All right, there's so much to love about this. The meter, the meter and the rhyme are infectious, and they get deeply embedded in my ear and mind without being cloying. And I think it captures something. Just the poem at large captures something of this character of Eärendil, which appealed so deeply to Tolkien's mind, and really it was at the foundation of the Legendarium. I don't know if you know this, Steve. This is kind of cool. There is in Old English a translation of the Latin, the antiphons that they I think still read in services before Christmas. So O Come Emmanuel is an English translation of these, but there's an Old English one that when it says "Hail, O Day Star," that's the Old English Eärendil. And that's where he gets this. So, Eala Eärendil Beorta Englast. I'm getting it wrong.
That's cool.
But so Tolkien takes that name for the day star, for Venus, and he almost builds the whole legendarium around this. Who is this Eärendil in Old Anglo-Saxon? Because this is pre-Christian, it's a pre-Christian, word. So Eärendil is the morning star, the herald of the sun. So in a Christian sense, is it talking about Christ, or is it talking about John the Baptist? Either way, there's this sense of heraldry, of foretelling, of announcing the coming of salvation, the coming of light. But now it's built into the story of the Silmarillion, and it foreshadows for us, the Phial of Galadriel with the light of Eärendil's star in Shelob's lair, and all. Anyway, all of this is present, kind of just sort of Easter eggs for later on.
Cool.
What about you? What jumped out to you before I say the other thing?
In retrospect, Frodo coming to and hearing Bilbo chanting this poem rings really true. It's because again, it's got that driving, like you said, not cloying rhythm. It's got just sort of a a persistence to it and a beauty, and even like there's a difference, I think, because I read this earlier, I sort of read in my head, but it's a different thing to hear this out loud and get a better sense of the actual rhyme scheme, that there's the sort of rhymes within the various verses, and it's a very layered sort of intricately crafted poem, which nonetheless has this, like, it's delicate, but it also just has this driving, chanting, hypnotic, soothing something to it.
Yeah, the earlier versions are hard. They're challenging to read. There's almost a patter to them, and you have to be on to catch it. And it's neat to see how Tolkien took the complexity of that and softened it. And what I love about Tolkien as a poet, and I don't know poetry. I probably don't have any business saying this, but he writes poetry that teaches the person reading it how to say it in a way that doesn't become slavish to the meter, where the meter and the rhyme, they come through without like dominating you. It's weirdly easy to read, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, agreed.
One thing that I've heard other people comment on, and I don't remember who or I would give credit. This isn't original to me. The very strange word at the very end, the flammifer of Westerners. It's not a word that I think even appears in the English language apart from here. And one would perhaps expect a different word for someone bearing a bright and shining star. Perhaps, let me see, what is the Latin for light? That would be lux. So Lucifer. Oh, well, maybe that's why he said flammifer, because you don't want to call Earendel Lucifer. But there is maybe built in this sense of, I can go too far, but this idea, okay, the one who was supposed to carry the light fell. And now, who is the bright and shining star? Who is at the right hand of the Son of God on high now? Not the angel who should have been there because he rebelled, but the Mother of God on one side and John the Baptist on the other. They are light bearers now, and I don't know. I've got a lot of different layers all colliding in my head on this.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, is it possible that, we know how he felt about allegory, or at least what he said he felt about allegory, and did he want to avoid just being a little bit too on the nose, which is why he used that word? Because again, conceptually, right, this light-bearing being, right? I mean, using again the sort of day star and so forth. Maybe he wanted to avoid it for being too on the nose. Maybe he didn't want to draw those parallels too closely. Yeah, maybe it didn't come to him. I don't know. Who knows, right? I don't know if there's anything in the notes that suggests, how conscious a choice this was.
I think there's a deep dive to be done about this poem. But this is, again, Tolkien showing us something very much of himself in this chapter. Because this poem was with him for decades. And, the story of Earendel is the interesting one in the Silmarillion, because it in a certain sense, he wrote the whole thing around it, trying to give, this is simplistic, but trying to tell a story in which a character named Earendel could also be associated with the morning star. But Earendel's story is the one he never really did poetry about. He did poetry for Beren and Luthien. He did poetry for the story of Turin. But this is kind of the best we get of Tolkien doing poetry for Earendel.
Yeah. If nothing else, right, flammifer sounds like an English word, right? There's something about the heaviness of the consonants, right? It's a lot less vowel heavy. So maybe it was just a purely linguistic choice. He was really sort of like sticking into this is a Hobbit translation of whatever it is.
Yeah, and Tolkien did love the Old English, the Germanic the Germanic English words rather than the Latinate English words. Anyway, we probably have to move on here. I'm grateful. I'll make one other note because I guess I have to. After the poem is read, Bilbo asks the elves if they can tell which part was his and which was Aragorn's. They say they can't tell the difference, but Bilbo spills the details to Frodo of what was the difference. Would you read this little excerpt, Steve?
Frodo keeps learning things, yeah. As a matter of fact, it was all mine. except that Aragorn insisted on my putting in a green stone. He seemed to think it important. I don't know why. Otherwise, he obviously thought the whole thing rather above my head, and he said that if I had the cheek to make verses about Arendelle in the House of Elrond, it was my affair. I suppose he was right.
Right. And that's funny, of course, because Arendelle is Elrond's father. So, yeah, like, okay, cheeky. But the green stone is a little bit of a deep cut, and the explanation to this doesn't really show up explicitly, although it is all there if you read it. It's made explicit in the Unfinished Tales, the other book published. Rob Clark and I discussed this a few months ago. The green stone it seems to be the emerald upon his breast an emerald that shows up at the end of the second stanza. And it's connected, as it seems, to Aragorn's identity as Elisar, the elf stone, which is to say, by meaning, not direct translation, he is the renewal of his people, because that's what the elf stone was, an artifact that was made by an artisan in Gondolin, that was carried out of Gondolin by Arendelle's mother, Idril Celebrimbor, and then ultimately Arendelle carried it to Valinor. But in the Unfinished Tales, we get explicitly Gandalf brought it back, and he gave it to Galadriel to use in her renewal of Lorien. But he also told her that she would give it away to someone who would herald the end of her time in Middle-earth and take her granddaughter and go on and renew, men. So anyway, it's deep cuts and Easter eggs and layers all built in here. Anyway, that's important that we mention because it kind of closes a loop from a few episodes ago. Yeah. Any other thoughts from you on that, or any other elements of the poem, Steve?
I think, I'd be remiss, just given the season when we're reading this, that it is this green thing that is associated with renewal. Like here we are, like post-Pentecost, right? Like having just concluded renewal week, not praying to the Holy Spirit because the Holy Spirit is here, and the Holy Spirit, of course, is associated with like green vestments. So again, there, in terms of like his kind of latent Christianity, his high church Christianity, I can't help but think that there's something spirit-filled about that artifact and that choice of color.
I like that. That's helpful. All right. After that, Frodo leaves the hall with Bilbo to talk some more until Sam comes reminding him it's time to go to sleep. And with that, I think that about covers what I have to say about this chapter. Anything you would like to add with the last word, Steve?
I just to say that I think it's kind of delightful that the chapter begins with him awakening and closes with him going to bed. Again, there's just something so grounded and earthy and hobbitish about a chapter that begins and ends like that.
Which actually makes the chosen title for this episode really perfect. It's One Fine Day in Rivendell.
Yeah.
So, all right. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. It's time for sleep now, and then the Council of Elrond begins in the morning. And because we're short on time, we're actually going to skip the part where we ask you to read to us, Steve, although we'll return to that, as you might see at the end, or what comes next, because we're skipping straight ahead to a little segment I like to call They're Taking the Hobbits to Isengard. Now, Steve, I don't know if you've had the dubious joy of being quizzed about Lord of the Rings before in your times here, but if so, or if not, you get it for the first time. Now you get to play for absolutely no prizes, a little game which will test whether you are a true Tolkien fan whom everyone should listen to, or whether we've just wasted an hour, 2 hours of everyone's time. The format here is one I inherited from my dad and his brothers. They used to play this trivia game with each other when I was young, and when Lord of the Rings was still relatively new. The game is this. I will read a quote from Tolkien's works, and you will tell me who the speaker is. You also can earn bonus points if you can give the context, even if you miss the actual speaker. And so these bonus points might just save us both. Context will get you half a point each time. The other part is you can try to stump me as well. I'll give you 3 quotations and you can give me 2. And if we get 3 points or more, we survive. If not, then the Uruk-hai make a meal of us. The rules for the quotations are as follows. It needs to be an actual quotation by an actual character. No narrator gotchas. It needs to be a full sentence or a sentence fragment if that's all that is quoted. It doesn't have to be the full quotation, but at least, capitalized letter to period. And it needs to be taken only from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So I'll give you an example so you can see what sort of skullduggery you have to watch out for. The first time my dad played this with me, the quote he gave me was, "There let it lie until the end." I eventually remembered that Saruman says this within the Legendarium, but the speaker is actually Gandalf quoting Saruman at the Council of Elrond. So let the player beware.
Oh boy.
I have a category for you as well, and this category is Steve's favorite passages. Which is to say, I'm taking these quotes from passages that you have selected to read on your prior appearances on the podcast. So that should help a little bit, but we'll see.
I am fearful that I'm going to faceplant so hard.
But remember, context will get you everything, and I just gave you a huge hint on context. So with that, are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. Let me pull up my other notes here because I did not put my notes for this in the script. Okay. Your first quote is as follows. "This time you have nearly succeeded, but you have failed again."
This time you have nearly succeeded, but you have failed again. Not even the faintest of bells is going off in my memory. This time you have succeeded, but you have failed again.
This one is evil.
Man,
It would stump me too, but I did literally copy and paste it from something that you put in a previous script.
This shows how rusty I am because, like I said, it's been a while since I've actually opened up The Lord of the Rings.
Well, and it's 7 years ago now, in the 2019. Yeah. So you give up?
I give up.
No guess?
No.
I would suggest guessing.
Okay. Say it one more time.
This time you have nearly succeeded, but you have failed again.
This time you have nearly succeeded, but you have failed again. Is it Saruman?
Good guess, but no.
No.
The speaker is Pippin, and it's from the chapter The Grey Havens, so I'll read the whole paragraph. "But even as they stood there, and the elves were going aboard, and all was being made ready to depart, up rode Merry and Pippin in great haste. And amid his tears, Pippin laughed. 'You tried to give us the slip once before, and failed, Frodo,' he said. 'This time you have nearly succeeded, but you have failed again.'"
Awesome.
So, anyway, so I was not kind. Okay, now you
Good
ask
choice.
me a question.
Okay. I didn't go very far afield. I got a couple of bits of dialogue from this chapter that just, I don't know, kind of like resonated with me.
Very good.
So I don't think they're going to be that challenging, but
We'll
I kind of
see.
like them. So here's the first one that I have. "We have done well," he said, "but in metalwork we cannot rival our fathers, many of whom's secrets are lost."
So yes, that would be glowing at the banquet when he basically says, "I'm not going to tell you more about Balin, but I'll tell you about how we're doing." And Frodo's listening.
And I just love the sort of tragedy behind it, right? That as much bravado and that the dwarves are willing to talk about their things, there's also a sense of tragedy and loss that, our fathers were better than we are. We're this kind of people in decline.
Yes, it's very melancholy there. After regaining their place, they still haven't regained everything that was lost some things are permanently lost. So, all right. Your next quote.
Oh boy.
Which I actually accidentally just gave you a hint for. Your quote is, "Where shall I find rest?"
Where shall I find rest? Accidentally gave me a hint for it. Did I just totally miss the hint? Where shall I find rest? I'm going to blame this on the fact that I did not sleep well last night. Where shall I find rest?
Well, you can say I said it.
Is it another dwarf?
No.
Okay. Oh, I got nothing.
Okay.
Where shall I find rest?
You may kick yourself here. I'll give you a hint, because last time you were on, you were talking about how some things are permanently lost. Some things cannot be healed. And you selected to read some lines in a conversation between Frodo and Gandalf, when Frodo's talking about his wound that will not heal.
But it wasn't Frodo who said it. Or he's quoting somebody.
I didn't say that. I just said I'm giving you a hint.
Is that a misdirect, or is it Frodo?
It's Frodo.
Okay.
You get a point.
You are very kind.
I'll read the full thing, right? Are you in? So this is from the chapter Homeward Bound in Return of the King. So, are you in pain, Frodo? Said Gandalf quietly as he rode by Frodo's side. Well, yes, I am, said Frodo. It is my shoulder. The wound aches, and the memory of darkness is heavy on me. It was a year ago today. Alas, there are some wounds that cannot be wholly cured, said Gandalf. I fear it may be so with mine, said Frodo. There is no real going back. Though I may come to the Shire, it will not seem the same, for I shall not be the same. I am wounded with knife, sting, and tooth, and a long burden. Where shall I find rest? I should have given you the, I was mean in Where Shall I Find Rest? I should have given you, I am wounded with knife, sting, and tooth, and a long burden, and that would have been a lot easier. But
that would have been easier. No, this is okay. I think you overestimate my ability to remember things that I have said before.
No, it's the danger of just growing older. One has so much speech behind one. I remember when I was 18, when I felt like I had like a perfect memory of conversations I had, especially if I was arguing with my parents. But now, oh well. So that brings us, because you did get the speaker, albeit with some help. We have 1.5 points. 2.5 points. So we just need half a point now between the remaining questions. What's your second question for me?
Time doesn't seem to pass here. It just is a remarkable place altogether.
I think that's Sam, but I'm not sure.
No, that is, again, from this chapter, but it's Bilbo. Bilbo to Frodo once they sort of encounter each other. And Frodo is sort of marveling at the house, and Bilbo says, yeah, time doesn't seem to pass here, it just is, which I love that. That's kind of a Kairos Chronos kind of thing, right? The linearity of time falls away. So
yeah,
beautiful. A beautiful observation.
And you stumped me. So, all right, which means we're actually in trouble.
Okay, half a point.
Well, I guess half a point. But I'm going to say no points unless we need them, because I think you're going to get this one. Okay. Question 3 for you. Go sideways? Impossible.
Go sideways? Impossible.
Hang on, I'll give you a little bit more, because that's mean.
Is this a reference to a plan of some kind?
No. I'm going to give you more. Go back? No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go.
Oh, this guy has to be Sam, I guess, supporting Frodo, no?
I went back to The Hobbit for this one.
Oh.
Because your last appearance was on The Hobbit read-through.
Oh.
Where you read from the Riddles in the Dark chapter. because you liked it. So
I'm going to gnaw my finger off at this point. I don't know.
Well, the character who did the gnawing in the chapter that this is taken from is not the one who did the speaking. Go back, no good at all. Go sideways, impossible. Go forward, only thing to do. On we go. You're going to kick yourself.
I know I'm going to kick myself. I'm already kicking myself. Didn't realize my hamstrings were so flexible.
Oh, okay. You give up?
Yeah.
Okay. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars of which so many songs had sung, and also he had noticed that such weapons made a great impression on goblins that came upon them suddenly. Go back, he thought? No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward? Only thing to do. On we go. So up he got, and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, and one hand feeling the wall, and his heart all of a patter and a pitter.
Bilbo, okay.
There we go. All right. So we'll use that half point from the context, and we will barely, by the skin of our teeth, escape being looted and eaten by the Uruk-hai, and we remain unspoiled to quiz another day. Barely.
Despite the season, meat is not back on the menu.
They took our shoes, except we're hobbits and don't wear shoes. So they singed our feet, and we got away. All right. And that's all we've got for today. Steve, thank you so much for co-hosting the Amon Sûl podcast with me today. This is actually maybe the first time you and I have had the chance to really talk about Tolkien, and I'm really grateful for the chance. Thank you for sparing some of your really precious time with us today, and good strength with all of your endeavors. I'm really rejoicing to see you smiling and happy and on screen again, but not living on the screen because you have work to do in the real world.
This was a joy. I apologize to everybody out there that was hoping for a 5 or a 6-hour vigil, but maybe next time.
Well, and honestly, you can just tell me, Father Anthony, you can send me a message. Father Anthony, I have 5 hours available on this day and this time, and I will do all I can to cancel everything, and we'll bring you back for a special episode talking about whatever.
In retrospect, maybe we should add this to the start of the episode. Just listen to this at 0.25x speed. That's the way to go.
That's right. It will be very slow, but yeah.
But we mean everything we say.
All right. Next time on Amon Sûl, I'll be joined by an indeterminate co-host, although I'm hoping for Dr. Brad Berzer. But the reality is Great Lent and Holy Week, and they've completely consumed my capacity to plan ahead. I can promise you someone will join me to talk about the Council of Elrond, and I'll also say we might even do 2 episodes on that chapter because it's so long. I'm also thrilled to announce on behalf of Father Andrew Damick that Doxamut is back. It will be held September 4th to 6th of this year, Labor Day weekend, at All Saints Orthodox Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. Registration is live now. You can claim your place at the feast at www.ancientfaith.com/events/Doxamut. That's DOXAMOOT. You can send your questions, comments, topic suggestions, or orcish ideas for their taking the hobbits to Isengard to me at amonsul@ancientfaith.com, or you can message me through the podcast Facebook page. We also welcome guest co-host proposals, so if you have a chapter you'd like to discuss with us, please make a pitch. I still have several pitches that people have sent in. I just haven't had time to reply, but I promise I will. Lastly, we would love to receive more photograph submissions of landscapes that resemble Weathertop and the Weather Hills approaching it. So, if you live or work or commute in the vicinity of Weathertop, please share your view with us.
And if you want more of this kind of thing, subscribe to the Amon Sûl podcast on your favorite podcast app, and please rate and review. And look up the Amon Sûl podcast page on Facebook, click the follow button. Most of all, though, share with your friends. And while you're at it, if you appreciate this or other Ancient Faith media, go to ancientfaith.com/support and show some practical love.
We've been around since 2019, and you can find our full back catalog of episodes by going to tolkienpodcast.com or just, subscribe on your podcast. The Amon Sûl podcast theme music is Hidden Past, and the closing theme is Celtic Impulse.
Our podcast cover art was created by Samuel Hebel. Our video editors / diminutive culinary consultants are Simon Nelson and Mike DeGan.
And special thanks go to the Amon Sûl Facebook group for conversation, inspiration, and frankly, the only good reason not to delete my Facebook account forever. I am your host, Father Anthony Cook, and even though Father Andrew's reverie and elven enchantment is broken off by the clashing cymbals of this particular mortal's voice every time he hears me say it, this has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio. And Steve, since you were here for the first episode and your yay has been played at the end of pretty much every episode since, would you like to give a renewed rendition?
Yay!
Beautiful!